All right. Welcome back. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear now. This should be better. This is the mic I normally use. Just want to make sure everyone can hear. So if you could give me a thumbs up if the audio sounds good. Getting some thumbs up. Appreciate that. Thank you, D. Just letting everybody getting back in here. Hope everyone's doing all right. Happy Friday, right? Friday night. Okay, I got some thumbs up. I'm very happy now. Sorry about that. We tested this all out and thought it was all set to go. You know, we have a concept in the studio, blame the artist. Thank you, Howard. Blame the artist, BTA. So this is BTN. This is blame the Nick. Blame the Nicola. So just one more minute to let everybody get back in. So thank you. Okay. I don't want to keep your time wasting. Okay, let's jump in. Welcome to my first deep dive series, track by track, album by album, for what will hopefully be a successful endeavor, and we'll get to cover all the albums from Gish to Cotillions, my most recent solo record. I think that's about 13, 15, something like that. Gio could probably tell me. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this. Haven't really planned anything because I was there, and so I'm just going to try to take you into the sights, sounds, and smells. Howard Willing, my friend and engineer for the Pumpkins, was asking me what this was going to be like, and I said I just kind of want to put you back in the environment, give you a sense of a lot of things that probably have never been discussed publicly, stuff that probably would necessarily make a book. I'm not necessarily into talking about the drama as much as I'm talking into how the songs were made and the recording process, and give you a little bit of a holographic insight into how we made our records and how we evolved as a recording unit through the years, and of course into solo work as well. First thing I want to say is I realize it's heavy times. It feels a bit indulgent to kind of celebrate something which just passed its 29th anniversary, which means I started it about 30 years ago. So I realize it's heavy times, so I want to at least acknowledge that, and I hope everyone's doing well and is safe, and nothing here in terms of joviality or just having a laugh is meant to be, not recognize that there's bigger things afoot. But I did say I was going to do this, and I wanted to follow through. And I'm curious because it's my own trip down memory lane too. But one thing I wanted to say is just before I came on the air here, I got a very, angry is not the right word, strange message from somebody. Not something nobody knew, just a strange DM. The guy was basically saying, I know that you don't embrace your past, but you can't take away mine. And, I'll still listen to you, but I'm not going to listen to you talk or what you're going to do. Kind of trying to do what many people have tried to do with me through the years, separate me from me, as if my work is different than me, as if my musical prototype is different than me. Obviously, I've made a counter argument where you shouldn't overconflate the personality with the public person, because those are hard things to navigate, especially through the specter of media and a distance if you don't know the person personally. But at the same point, I am the person who wrote most of the songs that you would know. And so if you like the songs, you must, on some level, acknowledge something in me that you've liked. So it's always a weird argument when people try to separate me. So the reason I'm telling this is because for many years, I've been very sort of testy about the past, because as I came to understand it, it became a defining factor, as if to say, not only is this who you are, which, by the way, not true, but also this is all you are, or this is the only part of you I'm interested in. I'm sorry, I don't accept those arguments. I never will. And it's taken me a long time, though, to be comfortable to balance present and past, talk about the things that maybe who I am today, this incredible journey that I got to go on, a great musical journey. And so that's why I said the other day on one of the earlier broadcasts that I wanted to share some of these memories and some of these things with you, because I think that this audience, this faithful audience that shows up and watches these live broadcasts that I've been doing. I don't know if some of you are probably here for the first time. Last night we did a long telecast with Thunder Rose of the NWA on suicide and suicide prevention, covering a lot of topics that aren't the usual musical topics. So this is my way of sort of giving back and saying, I appreciate you. And if you are a fan, which I assume some of you are, that this is my way of showing you my appreciation for letting you in maybe a little further than I would. These are the type of things that journalists don't care about, but these are the type of things fans seem to care about. And if at the end of this hour or so, I can take you back to the sights, sounds, and smells of Smart Studio circa 1990 and let you into kind of how we worked and the sort of magic that was made and how basically in 46 days we made an album which changed our life and set us on the path to superstardom. So let's jump in. A little context first. Our first album was produced with Butch Vig, the great producer. But at the time we met Butch, somewhere in late 1989 or 1990, Butch was a relatively unknown producer. He had recently worked with Nirvana on some songs that I think just eventually just became demos. I think they might have been the early demos for what became Nevermind. We had managed to land a single with Sub Pop, just 2 songs. And so we chose Butch as our producer, although we didn't know him. So somewhere in 1990, I guess early 1990, we drove up to Madison, Wisconsin, which was where Smart Studios, the building's still there, right about a mile away from the Capitol building on sort of the main drag that takes you into town. Madison, Wisconsin being about 2.5 hours drive from Chicago, which to us was could have been 200,000 miles, because anywhere outside the city was far to us. We were poor. And on that day, and I'm taking you before Gish now to give you some context, the first day we ever met Butch Vig, we pulled up in the silver van that we had, which was constantly falling apart, which I think we bought for about $1,000. And we unloaded our gear there on the step, and later that day we recorded 2 songs with Butch, La Dolly Vita and Tristessa, Tristessa being our second single, I Am One being our first. So we knew Butch, and so when we got signed to Caroline Records, which at the time was a major independent affiliated with Virgin, our contract stating that if they wanted to keep us after the first record, they could drop us at any time, so it wasn't a guaranteed contract. But if they wanted to keep us for a second record, since they were going to put out Caroline, we would get booted up to Virgin Records. And Gish, the record we're about to talk about tonight, was so successful that they actually tried to boot us up at the end of the Gish cycle to re-release Gish on the major label Virgin, which I refused, which is a story you'll have to read in the book someday. Sorry, talking too fast. It's hard to go back sometimes, because I really do want to take you there, so I hope you do it faithfully. So somewhere there in early 1990, we recorded those 2 songs with Butch. Got on well. We're very happy, although the songs went really fast. I think we recorded in essentially 2 days. We drove up, recorded that day, stayed the night in a motel, recorded the next day, got back in the van and drove back. And the next time we actually saw Butch in the flesh, we were starting what was Gish. We had a budget, which at the time was $20,000, which, given the circumstances, I think would have afforded us somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20 or so recording days, which at that point was pretty standard. I think obviously it's skewed now because recording with digital, but that was considered a luxury. A couple and a half weeks to record an album. Most bands, indie bands at the time, made pretty basic records. I wanted to make something more ambitious, but certainly knew we couldn't afford to be overly indulgent. So, but some context before I jump into the songs, because I think it's something I don't want to say over and over again, so I'm sort of give this as a song context. I found it really difficult in the early days of the band to write songs, which seems strange now because I can't crank them out fast enough. But to give you some context, I Am One, our first single, which I believe was released in 1989 on the Limited Potential label, a local Chicago independent. That's the first song we're going to talk about. So if you can understand the context, basically a year and a half later, I still hadn't written a better opening song for the record. And we made the decision to re-record the I Am One song with Butch. And I'm not sure I knew that was going to be the first song. In my mind, it was always going to be between the first 2 songs, I Am One and Shiva, but we'll get to Shiva in a second. So we made the decision Butch didn't have any particular input on the material. He just expected us to show up and be ready. The understanding was we were going to record about 10 songs, which we did, sort of. And we talked about it, particularly Jimmy and I, and we made the decision to re-record not only I Am One, but also Tristessa. And again, I think the reason I'm saying this is it shows you it was very difficult for the band to come up with what I considered at the time to be original material. Riffs weren't easy to come by. The ideas didn't necessarily flow. And it sort of shocks me at the time, shocks me now looking back, that we didn't have more choices. We didn't have a greater width. In many ways, we walked in off the street that day in late 1990 to begin recording Gish without a lot of material and basically the best of what was our live set at the time. As some of you who follow other social media accounts, you'll see some of the gigs we were playing, Avalon Nightclub, some gigs at Cabaret Metro. So we were doing a lot of jamming. We weren't necessarily sure how that was going to factor into the record. I believe we were already playing early sketches of songs that ultimately became Rocket and Silverfuck and Siamese Dream, but we didn't feel those were ready. So to set the context, we walk into our first real record. We've got 3 guitars, 4 if you count my acoustic, Ovation acoustic, 2 Stratocasters, James's Black Les Paul, and I can't remember what bass we used at the time, and Jimmy's drum kit. We only brought up 1 guitar amp and 1 bass amp. That's all the equipment we had. We had no synthesizers. We had nothing. And so that's the band that came into Smart Studios that day in late 1990 to begin recording. So obviously, I'm going to talk about stuff in a way that we didn't record them this way, but more to the mindset of what we were thinking when we were recording them. So obviously, I Am One was, at that time, one of our most important songs. And again, we made the decision to re-record the song, which is pretty curious on the face of it, because although I like the song, I wouldn't consider it a great song, although it's sort of interesting. Lyrically, not a lot going on there. Basically sort of a riff on religion, and if anybody knows religion, the triune, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, hence the notion that I am one as you are three. And really more kind of a rocking, riffing jam. And what's even more curious is, because we'd recorded the song essentially over a year before, when we went to re-record it, we didn't change the arrangement at all. Like we didn't even spend a single moment that I can remember other than time we spent on stage. So all we did was to set out to record a better version of a song we had a year and a half or so to improve, which is pretty strange to me. As I may have said along the way, I'm sure I'm going to repeat some things for some of you. The original riff, the thing that starts the Gish album, is actually a drum riff that I wrote. Don't ask me how I came up with it. It was one of those things just occurred to me one day, and I asked Jimmy to play the riff, which he plays beautifully. And the riff and the whole thing was written around just that drum riff. I just love the sound of that. Probably somewhat influenced by the drumming style of Stephen Perkins of Jane's Addiction, who played this kind of beautiful, kind of jungly type of grooves. But also probably, Led Zeppelin as well. Sorry, I was going to make a point about equipment. Right. So to give you the context of Smart Studios, which was Butch's studio that he owned with a couple guys that were in... one guy that was in a band with him for a previous band called Firetown, and there's another band that they were in, this names escapes me, and another guy, Steve Marker. So eventually, if anybody knows Garbage, Butch was the drummer in Garbage, and the 2 guys in guitars. Those were the owners of Smart Studios. Butch and the other guy whose name escapes me, I'm so sorry. Lovely guy. In fact, he's the one who lent us the acoustic guitar that I played later on the record, but we'll talk about that in a second. So very much a homespun local studio built for independent bands. They, as far as I understand it, put all the sheetrock up. So it was a very rough studio. It wasn't like super pro or anything. The walls were at all kind of really strange angles, industrial carpeting on the floor. And if anybody knows equipment, Butch had a TAC Scorpion board, which is a totally entry-level mixing console. Not horrible sounding, but certainly not professional fidelity. The record was basically made on this TAC Scorpion board. which shocks me. Butch had one piece of outboard gear, which most of the guitars were run through, and the bass and the vocals. So we ran almost everything outboard outside of probably the snare drum, guitars, bass, and vocal through this one preamp, if anybody knows recording equipment. The way we normally would track during those sessions was I would go in the room and just Jimmy and I, because it was my responsibility to get good drum takes out of Jimmy. The drums were set up in the room, kind of in the middle of the room for maximum volume, probably the loudest drum room I've ever been in. It was so loud in there I'd have to wear ear protection inside my ears and then put headphones at the top, and it was still too loud. It was absolutely deafening in there, which is why you hear such a great drum sound. Butch had come up with this contraption. I'm going to try to sort of demonstrate it, but if this is the end of a kick drum, they had built this like about 4 or 5 foot long plexiglass funnel. It had a little hole in it so they could put a mic to close mic the drum on the inside. And then at the very end, 4 or 5 feet out, was another microphone to get a deeper resonant kick. Incredible drum sound that Butch got. Butch, being a drummer, always got great drum sounds. And pretty standard gear. Soul head, which anybody would recognize from the probably the Shiva video, which I still have. Standard Marshall 4x10 cabinet, SVT bass stack. Actually, no, sorry, on Gish we used whatever was Jane's Addiction had they were green, and I'm sorry, I should be more prepared. I know the tech people will be all over me. It was Hartke maybe. It was a very popular time. You couldn't really turn it up. It was solid state, so if you turned it up too loud, it would make this horrible distortion. But that's kind of how you get the clean sound. And we got that amp because we saw Jane's Addiction when we played with them in 1988. We saw them using that amp. So we thought that was the amp to get. Not a great amp, but good for recording. And so generally speaking, on a song like I Am One, Jimmy and I would go in the room, get a take on the drums. I can't remember how many takes we did I Am One, but probably wouldn't have been a lot. Probably 3, 4, 5 takes at the most. At that point, we weren't really cutting tape. So whatever was the drum take that we would do, then we'd get a good bass sound. I tracked the bass, put the rhythm guitars on, and then the soloing. For the guitar rig, we had a J88 MP1, which I think I sold when I did the reverb sale. I sold those. Quadraverb, which added a little bit of gain and effects when I needed it, and that's it. I mean, we had literally almost no gear, and the gear we had was half falling apart, except for James' guitar, which was new, which he still has. So yeah, I'm trying to think of what else I can add on I Am One. Again, I think it's very curious that we didn't really spend any time with the pressure that was on us. I don't think it really occurred to us, but looking back now, it's a strange decision. The second song, Shiva, I'd written the riff when I was working at a record store in Chicago, down on Belmont and Broadway, near what became the Pumpkins rehearsal space. I wrote it on my Ovation acoustic, and I just sat there all day playing, na, 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 and I wrote this song. And for me, from my personal vantage point, that's really when the Smashing Pumpkins really started on the road where I wanted us to go. A more original sound, a sound that felt less derivative. It's very hard, as anybody knows, to do that in rock. It took me years to even find a language that I understood and felt personal to me. And Shiva, in my mind, is like the first true Smashing Pumpkins rock song. I certainly debated at the time when we put the record out whether to make it the first or the second song, but I Am One still felt like the more powerful opener, which of course in hindsight proves my point, which is if it was going to be the opening track, you think we would have spent a little bit more time to come up with a couple new wrinkles, which is why the I Am One 7-inch single on Limited Potential and the release on Gish are almost identical. What else can I share about Shiva? Probably what defines it for me is it's probably one of the first songs that sort of has a personal manifesto to it, where it becomes personal. Like the lyrics are personal to me. Shiva being the inhaler and destroyer of worlds from Indian lore. I love the thing. There's different ways of spelling it. I spelled it, I guess, the way whatever book I had, S-I-V-A. Most people, use S-H-I-V-A, which why to this point people still call this song Siva, which might be the correct pronunciation, but being from Chicago, we said Shiva. Um, um, I think the song is really emblematic and one of the songs on the record that really captures the band's live dynamic style at the time. For comparison, if anybody knows, check out the Peel session version of Shiva, recorded probably about a year later, which is the song evolved from the Gish version. But we didn't actually, when we went in to record Shiva, we didn't have a set arrangement. We used to jam. All the parts were longer, shorter, depending on cues and glances out of the side of the eye. So that was the first time we ever had to make hard decisions. And I think Butch was helpful in that, in trying to get us to make it a little bit more of a pop song, a little bit more concise. But you also hear the band's early dynamic style, the shifts in tempo, the mood. There's a cool little thing in there. Our first use of the Big Muff actually on record. There's that sort of little liquidy solo that I play during the chorus. We used to call it, or what we knew, they call it the Clapton crying woman, or crying woman something. You turn all the treble off the pickup and get this kind of woo, and that's the first time we ever used the Big Muff on the record. Little do we know that the Big Muff was going to be such an instrumental part of our next record, also with Butch. What else can I tell you about Shiva? Oh, this reminds me, as long as I'm sort of wandering around in my own brain here, depending on how this goes and depending on the reception, I may do something in a couple days where I'll do a live Q&A. So if people want to ask follow-up questions about things I missed or maybe things I glossed over, I'd be willing to entertain that, but we'll see how this goes first. Let's see where I am. 2 out of 10, right? 11? I think Shiva's a good example of what, over time has become a really contentious and much debated issue about the Smashing Pumpkins, about who played what and why and where and how that evolved. Like I said, I'm really not here to delve into the drama, but I think it does, in order to explain the process of recording, that level of tightness and attack, I think it needs to be explained a little bit how we got there. When we recorded all our demos in 1989 or so, the songs that became I Am One and the early versions of some of those songs, what is commonly called the Ignafo tapes. Most of the band wasn't around when I was doing the recording. They were either busy or didn't want to come, or they didn't want to sit there for 5 hours while I poured over whatever. So it became this kind of thing that I would do the demos on my own. Nobody seemed to care or be uptight. Obviously, it's Jimmy playing the drums. When we went in to record La Dolly Vita and Tristessa with Butch, that was the first time that James and Darcy in particular were meeting Butch, and Butch did not have a favorable opinion at that time of their ability to play for a record. And given the time structure, like how somebody will look at their watch, it kind of fell on me like, well, we don't have a lot of time, and if this is going to take time, and it kind of like, it wasn't like a decision, it was just like he kind of looked at me like, well, who played on these demos that I got? And well, that was me, kind of thing. Well, why can't you do it? And everybody kind of looks around, okay, not a big deal, because that's the way we've done it. So when we went in to do Gish, the understanding was, well, this is a real album, we're going to have more time and stuff like that. Well, again, in the process, in the pressure of the moment, under the circumstances, it was Butch who pushed for me to play all the parts. Now, I would be lying if I said I minded incredibly, not so much that I wanted all the work, because I didn't, but to the extent that I wanted our record to be as good as possible. And Jimmy and I had an opinion at the time, which maybe wasn't the most fair, which was, we spent a lot of time practicing the basement. It's not our fault if you guys didn't. Now, that's a little bit of a bourgeois way to look at it, but we were also young men and, full of ambition. We also didn't have the benefit of Pro Tools. Those days it was literally tape or cut the tape. So when it came to things like guitar parts and vocals, and I'll get into vocals in a minute, we didn't have the luxury of moving stuff around like you do now, where people have the chance to play with more feel, and then if they don't, if there's one chord or one moment off, fix it. So it was just kind of thrown back on me during the recording process, although we had gone in with the understanding that it wasn't going to be that. And I was under the impression that it was going to be somebody else's problem to sort out. So again, it's back on me. Now, to give you a little bit more context, and Shiva's a good example, and if you go back and listen to this recording, you'll hear it. This is the first time in my life where I've got somebody breathing down my neck. When we did Tristessa, 4 or 5 takes, I could play pretty well. Okay, good enough, move on. Now, with some luxury and some time, now I got this guy I barely know, Butch, going, that's not good enough. What do you mean it's not good enough? Oh, it's out of tune here. And it's like, in what became, this super obsessive need. And I'm not saying it begrudgingly. I'm saying it from the standpoint of, I'm used to just kind of playing a couple takes, good enough, sing a couple takes, good enough. Now I got somebody whose job it is to make a super professional record for a bigger independent label, kind of telling me, no, you don't understand, it's not good enough. Well, what does that mean? Do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. So now I'm doing like 20, 30, 40 takes. Like, I've never played this much in my life. And he's starting to explain to me, see how this is better and this. Okay, so I kind of get that general understanding. Now when we get into the vocals, sing a line. Oh, that's out of tune. What's out of tune? I never even, I just sang. I didn't even know what in tune was. I mean, I could hear an out of tune guitar. So not only was there the pressure of making this debut record, which of course is trying to make a name for himself. We're trying to make a name for ourselves. We realize that if we don't do a really good job on this record, we're all going to go back to working our day jobs. But the bar that we had been under Tristessa and La Dolly Vita before, or even our demo sessions, imagine now it's 3, 4, 5 times the pressure and the accuracy rate and the necessity, which is why that record is so beautifully in time and in tune, because Butch insisted on me playing at that level. Of course, Jimmy plays very well, but he wasn't playing to a click on any of those songs. So he's all over the place because I want him to play super dynamically. So Shiva's a perfect example of the Pumpkins live style brought into the studio, Jimmy unleashed, properly arranged for the context of a sort of pop song, and then it falls back on me to create this well-oiled machine, which, by the way, doesn't exist. Nobody can play like that, probably not even me. But under the microscope, under the pressure, thank God I had the concentration and the ability to do it. So Shiva's a prime example of where, for the first time, the precision of what became the band's precision rears its crazy, ugly head, meets the pressure of the moment, which of course plays out further down the road on Siamese Dream. And so all these things are meeting together. And then in the middle of course, you have the typical band politic where people want to play their instruments and play their parts. And there's a lot of pressure there, and that's well documented. And like I said, I'm not here to talk about that, but at least bears some understanding for how we got to the position of me playing that and why, by and large, the sound that people recognize as what they call the Smashing Pumpkin sound is my ability to play with Jimmy and Jimmy's ability to play with me and play at that other level. That's not to say other people didn't make contributions. And in fact, a lot of times the way I would play, I would try to interpret the feel that I got from when the band played live. So it's not like there was a live version of the band and there was a studio version of the band. In my mind, the studio version of the band was me trying to emulate the live version of the band at its utmost to create maximum density and power, because certainly I thought we were a very good live band. And that also was a strange thing to try to understand, again, as a young person, 23 years old at the time, try to understand why somebody who was mature in Butch, who'd been there, who'd made major label records, was trying to explain to me what that level of proficiency was like, a level I'd never played at in my life. And suddenly I'm sort of in this position where I've got to sort of sing, I got to swim faster than I can sink. I got to play to things that are not perfectly chopped or timed or whatever. There's no click. Jimmy's playing like a madman. And there's no Pro Tools, and it's, away we go. The good news is we were able to do it, and we created what became the first idealized version of the band, which is why if you compare, say, something like I Am One, the limited potential version versus, say, I Am One on Gish, you'll hear the real difference of Butch's influence in that particular way, even though it still, quote-unquote, sounds like us. Okay, I think I've said enough about that. Hope you're having a good time. Appreciate all the hearts. Well, I've talked for 30 minutes, only about 2 songs. I'm going to have to shortchange you on the rest. Okay, back again to the idea that we hadn't written enough new songs for this record, which again boggles my mind. Rhinoceros, which was also a song we recorded for the Ignafo demos. We actually did two versions. And quick little side story, if you've ever heard the Ignafo versions, where one of the versions of Rhinoceros has a keyboard solo, well, that's because we thought it was funny if we had Mark, the producer engineer, play a keyboard solo, because he was a trained keyboardist pianist. And so that's the idea of a pumpkin joke, that we have him play a bad B3 solo in the middle of our psychedelic song. Why it seemed funny at the time or it seems funny now is beyond me, but that explains why Mark is on that particular track. Same thing. Here we are a year or so later. We're re-recording a song and we're trying to re-emulate it. I think actually that reminds me that the clean guitar sound for the nerds out there is actually a JC 120. I think we still had those amps. Those were the original Smashing Pumpkins amps when we were goth. So that is the clean sound, which I found out later was like the Metallica clean sound. Had no idea. But that was the only sound that could make that sort of a pretty simple, clean sound that Butch wanted. Again, I think Rhinoceros is a really good example of the band's dynamism come into play. There's like sort of the riffy solo in the middle, the sort of explosive ending, the use of the open chords. You really hear our style developing. And even though you hear early intimations, yeah, is that a word? Intimations of it on the Ignafo sessions, here with Butch's guidance and the clarity and the tuning, you really hear the power. Now let's go back to vocals for a second. The famous "She Knows, She Knows." Again, pre-Pro Tools for any musicians out there. Howard Willing asked me today, what was it like recording vocals? Well, give you a perfect example. We only had one 24-track machine. For you kids, that we used to use tape to record. So you have a big reel like this. You'd only have 24 tracks. And after all the drums were tracked and all the other music was tracked, there was only two channels left for vocals, which meant if I was singing a lead vocal, I'd sing, take, let's say, sing a verse. And I was not a competent singer at that point. My voice was pretty, but, singing that style wasn't easy, especially when it came to pitch. So we do do a verse, okay, and then go to the other track, sing the same 4, 6 lines or whatever, and then listen to both and get rid of the worst one, and then try to beat it. And we do that. Well, when it got to the point, we did all the rest of it. Came relatively easy because it's a fairly simple melody and fairly simple vocal. When it came to the "She Knows," 8 hours. That's what Butch Vig tortured me on. 8 hours. She knows, she knows, she knows. Like nobody's business. And I'm pretty sure we double tracked that. So it was probably 4 hours of one track and 4 hours the other. Again, I'd never been in that situation before. It caused a lot of, I'm not mad at Butch, but it caused a lot of kind of head fuckery because, here I am singing and I think I'm doing as good as I could humanly do. It's like asking me to jump 8 feet and I jump 8 feet and the person going, actually, can you jump 9 feet? I never jumped 8 feet, so I couldn't imagine jumping 9 feet. So I'm singing for hours. She knows, she knows, she knows, and I don't hear what he's hearing. I don't understand what he's hearing. Now I do, and I understand why he was so persistent, and it's a beautiful thing that he did. But at the time, being the age I was, immature as I was, not used to criticism. I was used to working on my own. I wasn't encouraged as a musician, so all my experiences were sort of in my own head. And here's this person who's essentially dad in the session. He's the person who has the strings on the budget and how long we're going to be able to record and whether or not this is going to be a success or not. And so he's telling me to do it again. I'm going to do it again. But 8 hours later, I thought I was going to lose my fucking mind. So to this day, when I hear that chorus, I still get like a little shudder at my back. A note on the guitars. At that point, we'd sort of develop, what was the Pumpkin sound. At that point, generally speaking, my Stratocaster went in the left speaker. James's Les Paul went in the right speaker. So you got this kind of zhing, and I love that sound, kind of a zhing left to right. So my guitar on the left would always kind of zhing before the Les Paul would kick in. So you had this kind of zhang, 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 and that was kind of our early sound before we went to greater density down the road. The two guitars I had, the Gish Strat, the one that was stolen, was the main guitar on the record, but usually only used for riffs. Anything heavy was that guitar. For solos and clean guitar, it was the other guitar, and you've probably seen pictures of that. It's got a kind of a super psychedelic paint job, different. A friend of mine, Crazy Nick, had painted that. I still have that guitar as well, and that had more attack. And so when you hear solos like on Snail and Shiva, that would be the other Stratocaster. On the solos and stuff like that, for example, on the solo on Rhinoceros, Butch gave me totally free reign. It was up to me to decide what was good enough. He'd probably only complain if it was out of tune. And so at least in that, I felt sort of a greater sense of freedom. Again, I'm just trying to take you inside the process a little bit because, I feel all this pressure. The other band members aren't necessarily happy about the way it's turned out in the sense that the producers made this judgment call that it's going to be me playing, the majority of the parts. And then this guy I've only known a couple days, is asking me to play at a level that I can't even psychologically process. He's asking me to sing in a level I can't psychologically process. Again, I appreciate it now, but at the time it was very daunting. So most of my happy memories involve things like extra guitar parts, solos, things like that, because it allowed me, or even the times where we were fucking off, and I could talk about that a little bit. It was like a way to blow off steam because all the other stuff, the riffing, the trying to be tight with Jimmy, trying to understand how to lock to a kick drum, both as a bass player and a guitar player. The stress level for me was off the charts. Probably average work day was somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 hours. In a normal studio day, up until that point, I probably worked 4 hours, 6 hours. And yeah, if you go into session a couple days in a row for long days, big deal. But when you're talking about weeks at a time, generally speaking, we drive up and stay up in Wisconsin and work kind of on and off. So we go up for 4 or 5 days, come back down for a week, go back up. So the album was made in piecemeal. So I don't have any particular memory other than we did it assembly line. We cut all the drums, then we cut all the bass, then we cut all the guitars, then we cut all the vocals. So that gives you some indication of how simple it was. And like I said, it ended up being, I think, 46 days at the end of it in total. We went over budget by at least $10,000. The label was not happy about that, but they were so happy with the result of the record. That was it. Bury Me, another song that had been around before. So here we are on the fourth song in the record, and really only one of the first 4 songs on the record is new. Again, real indications of how difficult it was for me to write and how I felt paralyzed by the opportunity. Knowing we're going to get this big record contract, our dream is realized, we finally have a legitimate label. We're going to be on the same label as Mudhoney and Hole and other great artists. Instead of jumping to the responsibility, I think I recoiled at it, which is why I think you don't see a lot of original material in this regard. Bury Me is one of those songs that through the years I've kind of gone back and forth on. At the time I liked it, then I grew not to like it. And I think I'd always considered it a little bit of a subpar thing. It's a bit of a hodgepodge as far as the song goes. It was a struggle for us to come up with, because the riff, the do 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 do, which starts the song and is the main part of the song, that was pretty easy to write. It was what followed. It was James who came up with the melody on the when it when it does the change. James came up with that melody, which is why he's singing on that, the Unchain Unchain. So it goes through that part and it just cycles back to the riff. And at the end, James actually wrote that part too, uncredited. The beautiful coda, the F to G thing, where it sort of sails in the sunset, and I play lead and sing that. So yeah, in my mind, again, going back to my struggles as a writer at the time, I always kind of looked a little bit down my nose at Bury Me, though I like playing the song live. For a while, it was one of our better opening songs. Like the lyric, it's kind of a cool lyric, but to me, it's like sort of a weird Frankenstein. It's like parts that don't kind of go together, but we kind of jammed them together and made them work, and by kind of owning it, it kind of works. That said, it's a song we had put on the set list for the upcoming Rock Invasion Tour 2, Rock Invasion 2. So I was looking forward to playing it again. So I must have some affection for the tune. But again, not a real standout song. And so here I am. We're, like I said, 4 songs in, and I think there's the good and the bad. You see the development of what became the Pumpkins' guitar style, the aggression, the power, the dynamics, the light and the shade, but it's really what we call in the band smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of dynamics covering for the fact that you don't have real good melodies and you're kind of getting by on guitar parts and Craft and Guile and Jimmy's Power and stuff like that. And I think that's why Siamese, the record that followed, was such an incredible journey, because we had to make the transition from that band to being a band that was able to write real songs with real melodies. But that's for another broadcast. The fifth song, Crush, still one of my favorite songs. I used to live with my future ex-wife in an apartment that she had above the Music Box Theater on Southport Avenue in Chicago. Anybody from Chicago knows the Music Box Theater, a cool old movie theater, which is basically an art house now. They had a series of apartments up above, kind of old school, little studio box apartments, and we lived up there. And I wrote the song one night. I don't think I was tripping. I either was tripping, but I don't think I was, or I was either coming off an acid trip, which is something else. I usually by and large, never was able to write songs intoxicated. I remember writing this song about 3 o'clock in the morning while my future ex-wife was asleep. Jerome Brown, our good friend from Catherine, lived down the hall in the same building, as did Tori Stern, the man who documented on video, if you've ever seen any of those bootlegs, which we still have in our possession, we hope to put out at some point. Tori Stern lived the floor below, just below, in the exact same apartment, but a floor below. So it was a fun building to be in, because we had friends there. And Crush is interesting because although I won't say the bands, two different bands use this exact same kind of riff, this do 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 do, in totally different contexts. And I remember hearing one band do it, and then another band do it a different way, and I thought, oh, that's a cool idea for a song. This idea, you're basically just playing the A major scale up, or they call it a flatted seventh. And so I was able to sort of incorporate that into something that felt sort of reminiscent and sentimental, away from more overt rock or psychedelia, into something that felt, in my mind, sort of more like Smashing Pumpkins. And then, of course, this optimistic lyric that was probably cribbed on some level from Curtis Mayfield, who I listened to a lot, a great artist from Chicago, a true pioneer in R&B and soul. I love trying to combine, and again, shades of Future Pumpkins, this idea of this kind of sunny psychedelic optimism with a bit of a sanguine minor key feel song. Although the riff is in A major, the song's essentially in minor, and that's what I sing again. We used to play this song live. It always went live, and so I can't remember whether we played this song live before we did the record. My memory is that we didn't. But certainly the dynamics in the song, however simple, would have been influenced by our lifestyle at the time, which is why I think the song adapted so well to live. The sort of the breaks and the ups and the downs, and the and again, also you hear, for the nerds, you hear the Leslie Roeder sound that's also used on Rhinoceros, our one good guitar effect. Suffer is much more difficult to explain, but I'll try. I always loved the kind of spooky feel of the Doors, and although it's not a straight kind of crib from the Doors in any kind of musical sense, it was the idea of a song that sort of encapsulates a night. We were certainly doing a lot of LSD at the time, and the idea of having a song on the record, and this is the kind of song I was able to write for the record. This kind of like a musical journey. I'd done a demo at home, using kind of like, sort of faux Indian drums, probably just bad congas on the HR-16A, the old gray drum machine that was the original Pumpkins drum machine. And so I had demoed this song out. I was dating somebody at the time who used to play penny whistle on stage, and so she'd given me a penny whistle, and since that's me playing the bad psychedelic flute solo in the middle, Butch just completely rolled his eyes, did not understand what I was doing. And again, you can hear the real influence of the band's live set. I don't remember playing this song live before that. It's possible that we did. I'm sure there's someone out there who can tell me if we did. But my essential thought was like, this is the type of thing that we're going for, in contrast to something like Shiva, which had a super heavy dynamic to sort of like a space dynamic, a jammy dynamic. This would be the other side. certainly influenced by all the psychedelic music that I'd listened to growing up. Bands from the 60s, kind of, like I said, kind of a Doors-ish kind of lopey feel combined with Indian music. Ravi Shankar, a lot of us listen to Ravi Shankar, huge influence on the Beatles. And so it's just this kind of melange. But in true Pumpkin fashion, we never took the song seriously. And although the song sort of sounds earnest and serious, we knew it was kind of a lark. And again, well, not again, but foreshadowing the way we treated a lot of our material. If we saw something as a well-worn cliche, we are okay with playing with the cliche if we were in on the joke, even if we didn't necessarily share the joke with you. So it's a bit of a lark on the sort of the psychedelic vibe, the raga thing, and we're able to flip in and out from the serious to the kind of the profane on it. I can certainly say this is not a song that Butch particularly liked or understood. I could be wrong on that, but my sense of it was he would have preferred if I had a better sort of song. But he certainly enjoyed recording it, and I love the tones on it. And this is where Butch really shines as a producer. You know, where a song like this on an independent record wouldn't have had the sonic advantages that we had using a great guy like Butch. So I think there's a real beauty there. And by using sort of the gear that we had, the tonalities in my voice, and Jimmy's beautiful drumming, we were able to create a space which really breaks the record in half and separates. Because without something like this, I think once we get into the songs that follow, it would have started to feel a little samey. Trying to think if there's anything else I can share on the song. No. Hope you're still enjoying this. How long are we in? 50 minutes? I'm doing all right. All right, Tristessa. Stole the title from a Jack Kerouac book, little book that someone had given me. I think Tristessa was written about a Mexican prostitute that he had encountered. I'd read the book, so I love the idea of a girl named Tristessa. As I stated before, we'd recorded it for the Sub Pop single. So, like I Am One, and also Bury Me and Rhinoceros, we're essentially trying to just do the better version. Strange decision, but the better version of what we had. I love the guitar sounds on this. I think Butch did a fantastic job, particularly the solo sounds. Trying to think of what else. Never thought much of the tune. Didn't even think much of the tune at the time, but it was more of a thing of like, well, we don't have anything better. And because no one else was really writing songs for Beyond the Stage, it kind of fell on me. And if I didn't have anything, well, then this de facto kind of slotted in. This is probably, of all the songs that we have on there, this is probably the one I regret the most. Not because I don't like the song, but because I think it's not as important a song in the canon of songs that we did, as far as like I Am One was probably our first really strong rock song that we did. Shiva was the first Smashing Pumpkin song in my eyes, that where we sort of really defined like who we were as a rock band. And if you had to choose, even though Tristessa is probably more of a catchy song, Bury Me sort of fits nice with the other songs, where Tristessa feels like more of the same to me. And so looking back, I sort of have a little bit of regret that I didn't try to sort of come up with something better, because if I'd found the other side of Shiva, which I did later, or even a song like Drown, which we were already flirting with the riff back then, I think it would have been a better record. Not to say it's a bad record, but I think it could have been better. And that's why I shake my head now that I didn't put kind of more effort in. Love and here's a perfect example of the way I would look at it. Love the opening riff. Verse kind of goes nowhere. Chorus is kind of non-existent. And is sort of a crib on our older song, East, kind of the way we flip modalities. And so really, really simple writing, something that we probably came up with in 2 or 3 days, and played on stage, and obviously had released as a single. And again, absolutely no improvement on the arrangement, brought nothing new to the table. In my mind, from this vantage point all these years later, complete insanity. And we were very lucky that not only did we get away with it, but we were rewarded with a very successful record. Window Pane, the ninth song on the record, is one we love playing live. And this is classic inner band psychology. A lot of people that we played the song didn't like the song, didn't get the song, and we didn't care. And what I mean by that is if we liked the song, or we thought a song was cool, it didn't matter what anybody else thought. And I don't remember Butch having a particular opinion. I do think he liked the song, particularly Jimmy's drumming and the whole setup, the long setup. There's a straight crib from, you can argue it's either from the bolero part, the solo part that goes on in the middle. It's either stolen from Ted Nugent or Deep Purple, you pick. Probably more Ted Nugent than Deep Purple, but I was certainly aware of the Deep Purple version. So you see, even our languaging is a melange of things we're cribbing from disparate sources and still trying to put together, but haven't really unlocked the secret how to write these things into, like, let's call it teen rock anthems. So in my eyes, looking back, very much a building block into the languaging. The song, as far as Windowpane, for those not as old as I, Windowpane was the name of an LSD that was very popular, in the 60s or 70s. I'd never taken Windowpane. I'd heard about it. There was a Liquid Sunshine, or there are a bunch of different names, but so it's my wink to sort of like, yeah, again, this is very Pumpkins logic. We're going to name a song after LSD to make fun of people who are naming songs about LSD. I hope that makes sense in the meta sense. Also another song like Suffer that really benefits from Butch's production. The austerity of the production, the simplicity of the production, I think really helps the song. Where I don't think this song would stand up to the review of the current recording process of the Smashing Pumpkins. I think what's really nice is it's a moment in time. Once we kind of blew past this moment, we never look back. I know Jimmy in particular really was always fond of playing this song. And I think it really shows the communication between Jimmy and I sort of developed, in practice and on stage. And so before I get to Daydream, the good part about this, if you look at the 9 songs, it at least shows and defines, and we were conscious of it, that this is the type of band that we were. We were riff heavy, we were cool, we were certainly capable of playing as heavy as any of our grunge contemporaries, but we had more of a psychedelic kind of sensual slant to it, which I think came to define us. And I'm really proud of the fact that we weren't afraid to be that band, and still aren't afraid to be that band. Where at that time, a lot of people were playing heavy to play heavy. Certainly Sub Pop was all the rage, and we were certainly aware of that. Okay, the last song on the record, at least officially, Daydream. Now, like I said, I kind of want to skip around the drama, but it's almost impossible to talk about this song with at least addressing a little bit of it. Daydream was a song that I wrote in my bedroom. I certainly was a fan of My Bloody Valentine. I loved the feel that Kevin got, this kind of spacey feel. And certainly this is some representation on some level of listening to My Bloody Valentine and sort of trying to capture that sort of psychedelia. Not so much that I wanted to try to rip off My Bloody Valentine, but that I liked that he had sort of found this modern way to do it, and so I was trying to figure out our version of what he was doing, not to steal him, but how he had decoded the psychedelia that he'd heard. It's a strange way to put it. Unfortunately, the song is probably too close to the bone, and I remember talking to Kevin once on a bus, and he told me he liked the song, and I said, yeah, you should, because you might as well have written it. Beautiful song. Just 2 minutes long. The first time we ever have any real strings. There was a couple that lived in Madison that Butch knew that came down and played this little coda that I wrote. And I remember when we were recording the strings, just falling in love with the sound of strings on record. And you only get that little bit at the very end, or where they come in and just play I think it's cello violin. And I remember thinking, if we could afford this all the time, which of course we did. And many millions later. That's a joke. But I have to address one little bit of Pumpkin drama. Now, obviously, the song is sung by Darcy. I'd done the demo. I had every intention of singing on the record. And up until the making of the record, there was no talk about Darcy singing the vocal. I hit upon the idea because I recognized that given the tracks that we were recording, Daydream was probably going to be the last song. So I loved the idea and this kind of psychedelic trip that we'd set up. And in my mind, it was kind of a record that you could take some shrooms to and kind of get lost in. That was the point. We were certainly going for that, and I think we somewhat achieved it given our limited resources and our limited abilities. I love the idea that her voice would contribute to the serenity at the end of the record. Because when I sang it in that key, it was a little bit lower. Once I heard her sing it in her beautiful kind of lower kind of raspy voice, I thought, this is perfect. Now here's where the stories diverge. According to my former bandmate, I became so jealous of her rendition of a song that I wrote. You got to remember that part. I wrote this song, and I sung on the demo. I become so envious of her performance here that I never again let her sing on a record. Let me set the record straight, at least on one of her many distortions. Recording vocals, as I said to you earlier in this, recording vocals at that level under that pressure was really, really difficult. It was like something I'd never experienced. Now I'm on the other side of the glass watching my bandmate go through it, and he put her under the same torturous scrutiny. It was excruciating to watch. I felt bad for her because he put her through the ringer, and her concentration not being the best. It was a very, very difficult process. And again, in the land pre-Pro Tools and Auto-Tune and whatever, we were just barely able to squeak out what is a very cool and beautiful vocal. So no shade on the performance, but it was very, very difficult to do. And in the process, she was difficult to deal with. And I made up my mind at that point that I wasn't going to go through that anymore, because once we went down that road, if she hadn't been able to do the vocal, and I would have had to step in after that, especially given the fact that I was playing on the record in lieu of her, that it would have been all-out war and probably would have caused a split, which would have led to her, in essence, it wasn't worth the drama to be in that position again. Now, to her discredit, from that point on, she never asked to sing any more songs, and outside, I think, of a couple that she sang on down the road, but that's a different story. She never again approached me about singing a lead vocal, nor did I offer. But by the way, we're talking about a song that I wrote for me, that I gave to her, and the only reason I didn't write any more for her or offer her any more of my songs is because I didn't want to be in the position that if it didn't go well, which on that song, it barely just went well enough, and I remember Butch looking at me like, this is fucked up. I don't have to go any more detail than I do there. But the fact of the matter is it created a scenario where I didn't want to deal with the downside, especially when we're talking about one of my songs. But again, no one ever prevented any band members from offering their own songs, so at least let the record stand that that's why she's on that song, and that's why she's not particularly singing anything else lead. There's other songs, those are stories for another day, and we'll decide to address them or not. But that's the true story about how she came to sing that song. And again, because the song was somewhat influenced by My Bloody Valentine, I love the sound of Belinda's voice in their thing, so I'm sure it had something to do with that as well. And certainly, again, no shade, a beautiful performance, and it stands, and I don't regret it. At the end of the day, that was the correct decision for that song. Okay, one last little note before we get off this, since we're about an hour in. Hope you've had a great time. I've enjoyed talking about these. Certainly a jog on the old memory. 29 years plus and counting. How we came to the bonus track, I'm Going Crazy. Well, as the sessions got deeper and deeper, and we got past, whatever, day 30, we started to go a little stir crazy. Jimmy had met some people who allowed us to stay in their house, so we were basically living at somebody's house when we were in Madison. So at least we didn't have the expense, and so we're forever grateful to those young women for letting us stay, because that elongated the budget and allowed us to have more recording days. So because of them, we ended up making a much better record than we would have had time to do. But as we started to get a little stir crazy, because being young men away from home, another city, hanging out, going to the bars, running around crazy, we started to go a little stir crazy. So one night, I don't remember, it was probably a technical issue, or we were, it's typical studio back then with tape. You'd stop for an hour because the tape machine, something like that. And I remember just picking up a guitar, hitting that first wrong chord. It's basically a G chord, just slid down half a step, which makes that horrible dissonant chord. And I just started singing I'm Going Crazy, because that's the way I felt. And so in the process of just sitting around, bumming around, I made up this song. And so I said to Butch, do you mind if we just record this? I'll just do it live. And so that take that you hear, the extra secret bonus track, which a lot of bands were doing back then on CDs, the secret bonus track that you had to wait, 1 minute for. What you hear is a live take with me in the control room of Smart Studios. Let me give you a little bit more biographical data on this, just to give you a little bit of a little bit more color on the record. Smart Studios was a 2-story building. Upstairs was the lounge, and that, of course, that's where we mostly hung out if we weren't working. And I remember a couple things that stand to mind. One is the Iraq War broke out while we were recording, and so it was literally the classic scenario of like you're standing in front of the TV watching CNN, watching the world on fire, and then you march back downstairs and start recording. It was during that period that we met the Frogs, who we saw playing locally. Obviously became a big influence on us and close personal friends, and God rest on his soul, who passed away about 7 or 8 years ago now. If you don't know the Frogs, please go out of your way to check out the Frogs, our dear friends. And there was one other detail. Oh, I remember. There was something where we had to go in the middle of making the record, and this is a good way to end. In the middle of making the record, we had to go to New York for a trip. I don't remember what it was. It might have been to play CMJ or something. There was some sort of reason why we had to pack up our gear, get in the van, drive to New York, and be there. And so there was an ask or demand, depending on who you ask, from the record label to hear our work in progress because there was great concern we were going to go over budget. And so I remember sitting in the office of the CEO of the record label, playing him instrumental versions of some of the songs that I've talked about. No vocals, just the backing tracks. Guitars, no overdubs, just bass, drums, and guitar. And that meeting changed everything because once he heard what we were doing, even though it was a work in progress, he was blown away. He was like, this is way, way better than I thought it was going to be. Keep going. You're doing great. And then one other little coda. The man who eventually became our radio rep at a label down the road, that's a story for another day, happened to be in town. And now that I understand these better, I thought he was stopping by to be friendly and meet the band. Classic radio guy, something right out of Spinal Tap. And so we got this thing, hey, so-and-so from the record label, the big label, not the independent, the big label's in town. Can he stop by and hear the record? And we looked like, oh, fuck, we don't want to play this guy the record. So he came, full on, loud, literally right out of Spinal Tap, had the loud coat and everything. Fast talking. And we sat down and we played him 3 or 4 songs. I don't remember what state of progress we were in. I think we were more towards the end of the process, so at least there were some vocals and stuff like that. And what I didn't realize is he was a spy sent there to report back on our progress because whoever was paying the bill up on top really wanted to know whether we had a future. And thankfully, he left and went back and reported that the record we had was going to be successful. And so that sort of greased the wheels and put in motion things that we couldn't possibly understand at the time. So thankfully, we were able to give them a record that they got behind. As I've said a few times, at the time it became the biggest selling independent album of all time. I think it sold about 450,000 copies in the first couple of years, which is why, although we're continually written out of the history, when we did the tour with the Chili Peppers, it was the Chili Peppers, Smashing Pumpkins, and a little band called Pearl Jam, who had just put out their debut record. We were riding high on the success. Of course, people keep trying to write us out of that history too. That's fine. That's a story for another day. But the fact of the matter is, it's a hugely successful record. The other day, I know it was a couple weeks ago, typical, you're flipping through, Instagram. Somebody tags me on Gish, and okay, everybody's got an opinion. I'm looking what the guy says. And he says, this record's largely forgotten. No, this record's not largely forgotten. It's a platinum record. There aren't a lot of records in this world that go platinum. I'd say that's not forgotten. Secondarily, it's a hugely influential record. Had a lot to do with everything that followed, including the production of Nirvana's Nevermind, because Butch took some of the recording processes that I had brought into the studio and applied them to Nevermind. He's talked about in the interviews. That's not a conspiracy theory. The way people recorded guitars, the way people approached their records very much changed after Gish. And let me give one last credit where credit is due. The Gish production style, which by and large is very dry and very in your face, was a deliberate decision on my part. And again, Butch did an incredible job getting the tones, but it was me who wanted the record dry. It was me who wanted, because at the time, people were kind of into what they call a Steve Albini production, kind of room mics up, real kind of boomy. If you heard like Pixies or Nirvana's album, that sort of bigger, All Apologies, that sort of bigger room sound. I wanted to go the other way. And who was my influence on that? Rick Rubin. I was listening to some of the records. I didn't know Rick Rubin at the time. I was listening to some of the records that Rick was doing. Who was Rick emulating? Black Sabbath. Who was my favorite band? Black Sabbath. So when I heard Rick's production, I thought, oh, he's doing Black Sabbath. And so Gish had everything to do with us doing Rick's version of Black Sabbath. Guitars cranked, in your face, keep it simple, get the Ozzy vocal in the middle. And so I think there's, of course, many more details I'm sure that are in there if you just hit me in the head enough. But I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive. The stories get better, I promise you. They're not as deep here as they could be, but because, you're basically talking about a band capturing a snapshot in time. We were a typical club indie band that was lucky enough to land a record deal after being rejected by every label multiple times. We go in the studio. Incredibly, we don't write any new songs except a couple kind of psychedelic jams. We go in and wing it. Thankfully, we're with a future legend in Butch Vig, who gets us to play our best and be our best, particularly Butch as a drummer challenging Jimmy. Did I skip over Snail? I did. I know somebody's going to write me that. If you don't mind, I'll go back to Snail. All apologies. No pun intended. Because Snail is something I want to talk about, and it brings me back to Jimmy. That's a perfect way to end. But I'll be quick about it. Snail is one take on the drums. I remember the day very clearly, standing there in the room, like I said, earplugs in, headphones, a deafening drum sound. And Jimmy goes out and plays that take in just one take. And for drummers out there, what I'm talking about, sort of 2/3 of the way the song shifts from 4/4 to 6/8, which is very difficult to do. And then Jimmy plays those blistering fills coming off the solo. That's a real early indication of the drummer that Jimmy Chamberlin was going to become. I was certainly used to that guy. I'd played live with that guy. But when you saw it in the hothouse of a studio, because not everybody, when that red light goes on, can play at that level. And that's what makes Jimmy a star, his ability on that. I feel weird going out of sequence, going backwards. Now my brain's all joggled. Again, unprofessional. Should have done a better job next time. What else can I say about Snail? It's actually, you should kick me because it's one of my favorite Pumpkin songs of all time. I think what's beautiful about Snail is it really captures the innocence of the band. We were really prepared for the world we were about to enter into. And so what I love about that song is it has the optimism and the feel of who, in many ways, what I would try to say to you is that's who the band really is. The band without the pressure, the band without the aspiration, the band just being the band, kind of a little bit groovy, wearing our thrift store psychedelic shirts. Snail is probably the best emulation on Gish of who the band actually is as the four personalities together. The people we were at the time, not the people that we became, including myself, but the people we were at the time. So I have a soft spot in my heart for Snail, which is why I love to still hear the song and still play it, because unlike a lot of the other songs that have sort of aged at different degrees depending on the influences and who I was trying to emulate and what I was trying to say, Snail is very much a true spirit thing. And it holds up, not because it's a fantastic song, but it's such a true song. So again, hope you enjoyed this deep dive. Sorry for my lack of professionalism. And please send me your comments. And then if I feel good about it, we'll see. I have to meditate in my listening to Suffer on a bunch of mushrooms. I'll make a decision whether I want to keep doing this. But I appreciate this first one. I appreciate all you tuning in. Be safe out there. Lots of love. Talk to you soon.